All righty. Well, as Chris said, tough topic, and excited to get into this because I think it's extremely encouraging in spite of how it might sound. When you're thinking about God wiping people out in the Old Testament, and then as we get through it, I'm always find myself surprised about what we're able to find right in the Scripture itself. But it's an attack that is an attack on the Christian God from within the Bible. And so it's using the Scripture itself to draw, let's say, skepticism about the God within the Bible. But before I get into or get started on that, this is my family. So I got my wife, Ann. We got Avery and Addie. Addie's in first grade, and Avery's in third. So I've got a lot going on in our home. So that's what my life looks like, is enjoying our two little girls. And usually I'm working with college students. I'm going to talk about Avery with my third grader. But usually I'm working with college students, and one of the things we talk about with defending our faith is when you get opportunities to talk with people and to share about your faith. One of the things you want to be able to do is really help someone maybe think about stuff they've never thought about before. And it's not necessarily that I want to be ready to deal with or help the person that's attacking the faith, but it's fine to help them too. But most importantly, I want to be able to help this person who's saying, I don't understand this. I'm having a hard time with some passage or a question, and they really have an interest in understanding it, as opposed to being this person who just wants to attack us. And those are those people that have the sincere interest that we really want to be able to help. And this question will be one that comes up eventually, I think, in that kind of a context. But usually I'm talking with these college kids about it, and I'm talking about the person you get to help down the road. It might not happen very often, but ultimately it might end up being your son or daughter. That's the person asking you questions. And if nothing else, if only person I ever get to talk to about it that's asking me questions is them, all the study is worth it. Because it's just such a blessing to be able to build into their life. And the reason I'm sharing that is just this week, on Monday, my daughter Avery comes home, and she says, Dad, I need to talk to you. I said, okay, you can talk to me. But she says, you got to sit down and pause that TV. I have the baseball game on. So I said, okay, pause that. And it says, so I have a question, and I've been thinking about it all day. And she says, I learned about this, I think it's Chinese story about the creation of the world. And she says, this is not true. She said, but how do we know that Christianity is true? How do we know that Jesus is real? Right? I said, okay, this is good. And so I said, what is this story that got you thinking about this? So I never heard it before, but there's apparently some being, or this looks like a person in the drawings, that comes out of an egg, then creates the world, and then when they die, their blood becomes water, and their breath becomes wind and air, and their bones become minerals, and all of a sudden, and then that's how you get this stuff on the earth. But he created the earth after he came out of an egg. So he said, well, let's talk about how do we know that's not true? Well, because it doesn't say that he's a god. It says he's a creature that then did this. Okay, so we're looking. She showed it in an encyclopedia. She found it. So she's like, okay, here it is. Said, So the reason we know that's not true is because you couldn't come out of an egg and then live if you're not on a planet, right? And then create the planet and then live on the planet when there's no water or no air yet, because that didn't come till he died, right? Oh yeah. So why is this not true? It's not true because it didn't happen. Because it couldn't happen. It's irrational. Okay. So in order for what we believe about Jesus to be true, what would have to be? What would have to have really happened? Okay. So how do we know that Jesus is God? What's our reason? Why would we think that? And she says, we've talked about it, so she says, well, because he rose from the dead. Yeah. Okay, but how do we know that? And this is fun for, if you enjoy talking about these things, like, this is fun. My kid's asking these great questions. And anyway, we kind of walked through that, and then questions came up about, okay, well, in order for him to get to be risen, for that to really have happened, well, then his body can't be in the tomb, and so we talked about that. The tomb would have to be empty. And then we got into, well, so some people think that it's empty, though, because the body was stolen, and so we started talking about these things. But I just share that as, it's one of those really encouraging things about when it comes to defending your faith, is because if more than anybody else, we want to be able to help our children. And if that's the only people that ever ask you questions, learning stuff is all worth it. So that's I'll leave it at that, because it was a fun little story for me this week. But that's them there, and we are going to jump into some really tough stuff, and it's interesting as well. So there tends to be, on this topic, we want to understand this command of genocide in the Old Testament that God gives in light of the fact that isn't God good and loving? And then people will challenge it, saying a God who commands genocide can't be good because that's evil. So he can't be good or loving because he's commanding and even participating in evil. So what will happen is we start to say, well, look, there's two different gods in your Bible. There's one God in the Old Testament that's a God of vengeance, and then there's another God in the New Testament. Well, that's a God of grace. And they say, well, sure, I like the one in the New Testament better, but if it's not the same God, your God's probably not real. And so why would I want to believe in the God of the Bible? Look at that Old Testament God. That's a vengeful, vindictive God. I don't want anything to do with that. And some examples of things that are written about this. First here, we have from Charles Templeton. It says, the God of the Old Testament is utterly unlike the God believed in by most practicing Christians. His justice is by modern standards outrageous. He is biased, querulous, vindictive, and jealous of his prerogatives. Now that's just a warm-up. So here comes another one. Atheist George H. Smith. He says, the Old Testament God garnered an impressive list of atrocities. The Old Testament credits the Israelites, acting under the auspices of Jehovah, with massacring an incredible number of men, women, and children through conquest. Jehovah himself was fond of directly exterminating large numbers of people. And then Richard Dawkins. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it. A petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak. A vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser. And it goes on with other stuff. So to shorten it, a racist, infanticidal, genocidal, capriciously malevolent bully. Where are they getting this? From the Scripture and the destruction of the Canaanites coming into the promised land. All right. So the challenge regarding this wiping out of the Canaanites, again, it's an attack on an all-loving God. It has the goal of showing this Christian God may not just be vengeful, but might actually be evil himself. And therefore, why in the world would we be following this God? So I want to take a look at the case against God from the Old Testament. And I'm going to present it to you in a little devil's advocate method. So know what I'm doing as I'm going through here, and I might sound like I'm attacking a little bit, but that's what I'm doing. So, the most troubling act of God, of your God, is the commanding of genocide on a few occasions. And this is the same God who, in regard to Israel, declares this in Isaiah. He says, I am the Lord, I have called you in righteousness, as a light to the nations. Isaiah 42:6. It then commands them, it doesn't make any sense that then he goes on and commands them to exterminate other nations. I called you as a light to the nations? Oh, but exterminate those nations. What a contradiction. A perfectly good God, he would desire for the Israelites to extend love and mercy and compassion to their neighbors. Why? In order to be a light. But not to exterminate them out of some kind of vengeance. In Deuteronomy 7, we see him give a direct command. Verses 1 and 2, he commands the Israelites regarding their entry into the promised land. He says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land where you are entering to possess it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them before you, and you defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them, you shall make no covenant with them, and show no favor to them. Okay. Now, just in case you wanted to kind of interpret that your own way, and not understand what he wanted, or just in case you didn't understand, he reiterates it. And this is in Deuteronomy 20. Only in the cities of these people, that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall not leave alive anything that breathes. Okay? You were thinking, here's what chapter 7 looks like to me. No, stop. This is what it looks like. You shall utterly destroy them, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Not just one or two of them, all of them. Tells them twice. And the carnage continues to be a priority for God as we enter into the book of Joshua, and it begins with Jericho in Joshua 6:21. And they enter the city, and when the walls fall down, and we see that they utterly destroyed everything in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and donkey with the edge of the sword. Doesn't sound like a very merciful God. And this kind of thing has prompted Richard Dawkins to comment this way: the destruction of Jericho and the invasion of the Promised Land in general is morally indistinguishable from Hitler's invasion of Poland. They might say it was worse. Then in Joshua, chapter 9, verse 15, I believe this: the people make peace. Joshua makes peace. He actually wasn't supposed to. He makes peace with one of the cities, or one of the nations. The Gibeonites, they want him to help them. Well, they made a treaty. And then what we're going to see is what happens, but they make a treaty, and now he's going to end up helping them and protecting them. But what we see is the Israelites are more merciful than God. And that was 9:15. And then we get to Joshua chapter 10. And we got a lot going on here. So, you need to do some Bible reading in your life? Here you go. We got a chapter we're going to dive into. So, they made this treaty with the Gibeonites did with Joshua and Israel. And then the other kings of the Amorites heard about that, and they came up against Gibeon because they weren't happy about it. So the men of Gibeon sent word to Joshua at the camp at Gilgal, saying, "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites that live in the hill country have assembled against us." So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the valiant warriors. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear them, for I have handed them over to you. Not one of them will stand against you." So Joshua came upon them suddenly by marching all night from Gilgal. And the Lord brought them into confusion before Israel, and he struck them down in a great defeat at Gibeon, and pursued them by the way of the ascent of Bethoron, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled from Israel, don't miss this part, while they were in the descent of Bethoron, the Lord hurled large stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more men who died from the hailstones than those whom the sons of Israel killed with the sword. That's your God. Go, I want you to go kill those people. Oh, those guys are getting away? I'll take care of it. I'll wipe them out. He kills more than the Israelites did. This is the God you believe in? This gracious, merciful God that you talk about? Then it continues. After he kills the 5 kings, in between here, I'm skipping that because this will go on and on. But he kills the 5 kings, and then they move on to Makkedah. So now Joshua captured Makkedah on that day and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed it and every person who was in it. He left no survivor. So he did to the king of Makkedah just as he had done to the king of Jericho. And then Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Makkedah to Libnah and fought against Libnah. And the Lord also handed it over to Israel with its king, and he struck it and every person who was in it with the edge of the sword. He left no survivor in it. So he did to its king just as he had done to the king of Jericho. And Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Libnah to Lachish. And they camped by it and fought against it. And the Lord handed Lachish over to Israel, and he captured it on the second day and struck it and every person who was in it with the edge of the sword, according to all that he had done to Libnah. And while that was going on, then Horam, the king of, I think it's Gezer, came up to help Lachish. And Joshua defeated him and his people until he had left him no survivor. And Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Lachish to Eglon, and they camped by it and fought against it, and they captured it on that day and struck it with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed on that day every person who was in it, according to all that he had done it to Lachish. Then Joshua and all Israel with him went up from Eglon to Hebron, and they fought against it, and they captured it and struck it and its king and all its cities, and all the persons who were in it with the edge of the sword. He left no survivor, according to all that he had done to Eglon, and he utterly destroyed it and every person who was in it. This goes on and on. There's more. So they then go to Debir. Joshua and all Israel with him returned to Debir, and they fought against it. He captured it and its king and all its cities, and they struck them with the edge of the sword and utterly destroyed every person who was in it. He left no survivor, just as he had done to Hebron. So he did to Debir and its king, as he had also done to Libnah and its king. So Joshua struck all the land. Now here's where we get, it's beyond just the cities they named. He struck all the land, the hill country, the Negev, the lowland, and the slopes, and all their kings. He left no survivor. He utterly destroyed all who breathed, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. Joshua struck them from Kadesh Barnea, even as far as Gaza, and all the country of Goshen, even as far as Gibeon. Joshua captured all these kings and their lands at one time because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. Wow. This is the gracious, loving God that you tell me about in your New Testament. It's a different God. So I don't believe that God loves, or God is love, or that God loves us. And if you believe that, you're not paying any attention to the Old Testament. Now that might be an example of an attack that we might hear. Now if it's coming from, you're a family member, it might be a little nicer done, Might not. You never know. But we have this Old Testament God of vengeance, and we have this New Testament God of love. And I'm going to say, I understand the God that you believe in. That's a good God. It's just not real. I get that you don't believe in this one. You don't believe in this God of vengeance that just wipes people out. But if your God is real, it's this. You can't just ignore it, and so therefore I don't believe. Might be the presentation. So we want to tackle this. And what's amazing to me in tackling it, I'm done with that, by the way. I'm done with being devil's advocate here. In tackling that, what I think is so interesting about this is we're going to see how good God really is. We're actually going to see a good God within this. But it's really difficult because there's no like place where we're directed in Joshua to go try to find the answer. So they're looking at Joshua and you see all this mess going on and you think, well, what do I do with that? You can read the whole book and you're like, I'm not sure why. And then you find the command is in Deuteronomy. Okay, here's the commands. Okay, there might be some things that help us here, but I'm going to have to go to a lot more than just Deuteronomy to find it. So we're going to do actually a lot of reading today. So, but that's just necessary because the attack is coming from the Bible, within the Bible. Okay, so they're taking the Bible and using the Bible to attack Christianity and the Christian God. If you're not using the Bible, it might not be appropriate to use the Bible in response based on what their challenge is or their question is. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it might not be so appropriate. But if they're using the Bible, it's absolutely appropriate to use the Bible. There's no question then, because they're using the Bible itself to attack. Okay, well, let's see, how does the Bible answer it? What response does it have? So some specific questions that are helpful to navigate this complicated challenge. 4 specifically here. And I'm going to talk about each one briefly. But first is we're talking about an omnibenevolent God that we believe in that certainly is in the New Testament. We think it's in the Old Testament too. But what's necessary for this God to be all-loving? Well, if God is actually omnibenevolent or perfectly good and loving, well, then he didn't just become loving all of a sudden in the New Testament. I think we would understand that. He must have always been faithful and compassionate and merciful and just. He must have always been these things. Otherwise, this God wouldn't make any sense. One time had these attributes and these characteristics. Another time he has different. I don't even know which ones to trust in now. He's always been it. He's always been all of these things. In fact, to lack any of these things, any of these characteristics of being loving, would prevent God from being perfectly good. If he lacked any of them, and you'd have to say, well, that's not a good God. He lacks any of them, any one. Now, it's important to understand. Being just is on the list under omnibenevolence and being an all-loving. Because if you don't care about justice, I'll put it the other way, if you don't care about injustice happening to people, then how can you say you love them? Well, I love you, but I don't care about any of this injustice happening to you. Doesn't matter to me. I'm just indifferent about all that. You're like, wait, that's not loving. You don't even care? So he's got to be all these things, but that's in the picture here. It's a part of it. So let's go to the next one to get a deeper understanding here. We ask the question, must God always be merciful in order to be loving? Okay, he's wiping some people out, maybe a lot of people. This looks like he's not being merciful. Does God have to be merciful at all times to be loving? Well, some thoughts on that. I would say God must act in a way which is consistent with his omnibenevolence. He must act justly, or mercifully, or patiently, or faithfully. However, love is primary, and that's the foundation of each of those aspects of love, or of the good. So it's the foundation of each characteristic. So therefore, God could show his love in any of those ways. He's not obligated to exercise all of them at all times. He's obligated to be acting in a way that is loving. And if being just, exercising justice is loving, then that's one of the options available to him as a loving being. It's also an option to him to be merciful. And we're going to see that he's done that as well. It's an option to him to be faithful. Well, he's always going to do that. He's always faithful. If he said something, he's going to do it. He's going to do what he said. He's going to be faithful to what he said. But it's an option for him to be patient. So, mercy, when we think of mercy, we can understand that it's when there's maybe evil that's happened and you're having mercy. Mercy is there's a delay of justice. If you decide to have mercy on someone, it's not that you don't care about justice, but there's a delay of justice. So someone is guilty of some crimes, or like it's not that bad, okay, so we're going to put them on probation. And what are we doing? Okay, we're going to have mercy on you. But what we're hoping for is that you will sort this out and straighten things out and get this corrected. And that this will not be an issue that's going to continue on for you. If you do, if you can't handle this, well, then maybe justice is going to have to come. But we're hoping you'll take care of it such that we don't have to bring justice, but you're going to make things right. Well, God can have mercy in delaying justice. It doesn't mean he doesn't care about justice, but there's like, okay, I'm not exercising that yet, but this is on the table because he's a loving God and he cares about the others who are the victims of the injustice, and he cares about justice on their behalf. Okay, if I'm having mercy on you, what are you going to do? You're going to take care of this? Well, no, you're continuing. You're continuing in that? Well, justice is coming. And it's more likely it's going to come from God maybe than the government. But a God who doesn't care about justice, we'd say, would not be good. He's indifferent, he doesn't care about it. That's not a good God. So God will actualize every characteristic of love because he's truly good in his essence. But it's that all he has to do is he's actualizing any aspect of that. Not all of them at all times, or always merciful, and thank goodness, not always just executing justice. That would be undesirable. We're like, okay, I'm thankful that there's a balance, and he has the understanding, the knowledge to know which aspect do I need to be carrying out now. At any given time, this is what's needed now. This needs mercy. Needs patience, and this needs justice. It's reached that point. And God has that wisdom to understand that. The third one is there really only wrath in the Old Testament and only grace in the New? Grace and mercy in the New Testament. They're like, well, there's this God of grace and mercy in the New. It's this God of wrath and vengeance in the Old. Is that true? Don't think so. I'll give you some examples. In the Old Testament, we all know about Nineveh with the story of Jonah. And you see God wanting to have mercy and wanting to send Jonah, and Jonah doesn't want to go, but he wants him to go because he wants to have mercy on them. He doesn't want to destroy them. Another one that comes to mind is with Daniel in the lion's den, and after that happens, I think it's, well, I forget if it's Darius or Cyrus, but anyway, it comes out of the lion's den, and you see the king proclaiming that this is the God of Daniel is the true God, and you see this mercy coming on it's the nation of Media, which is now at that point has taken over Babylon, and you see this grace coming towards that nation. Interesting. God wasn't just out to destroy them. In the New Testament, we have the story of Ananias and Sapphira, and they get struck down. Looks like God is not just merciful all the time in the New. So there's examples on both testaments. Our fourth question: why would God destroy some nations rather than others? Now, this is where we're going to spend most of our time on this subject, because that's at the core of the issue. A lot of that other stuff was just kind of some setting a context. So now, why would God allow or destroy some nations rather than others? Some thoughts on this one. So we wonder, what conditions would make God's justice necessary? Emphasis on necessary. So if he's carrying out justice, especially in the way that we're talking about, what would make that necessary? It doesn't seem like he'd be doing it because, well, we're just going to try it. No, it seems like we'd be doing what we've been reading about, only if that's necessary. What would make that necessary? Another question, under what conditions could a command of genocide be consistent with God's goodness? How could such a command be consistent with being an all-good God? Most specifically, consistent with his justice. How is this consistent there? Is that really just to just wipe out or exterminate entire nations? Some initial thoughts. Well, God's command and action, or his action, must not be immoral and certainly not capricious. Can't just be without any cause or reason. I just feel like doing that. I just don't like them. They're in the way. I want the Israelites to have this land. These people are in the way. Wipe them out. Oh boy, that doesn't sound like there's just cause. Now, to not be capricious, the command would then have to be morally justified. And then to be morally justified, there has to be just cause. And then third, it must be the necessary means to a greater end, not the end itself. This is going to be an important concept here. It's the necessary means. I'm answering that second question up top. Under what conditions could a command of genocide be consistent with God's goodness? Well, for one thing, for sure, it's got to be a necessary means to a greater end, not the end itself. The goal is not wipe people out. If that's all it is, then we got a lot of questions. Like on exactly what the skeptic is raising about how could this God be good? So, we saw God's commands in Deuteronomy. But it's essential to keep reading and not just stop. Because what generally happens is the skeptic just reads the part that's, let's say, most convenient. Imagine that. But as we start to look at this, we're going to realize that it wouldn't make sense to think that an omnibenevolent God is wiping people out simply because they happen to be in the way, right? Or because he just wants to eliminate certain people groups just because. So we want to seek what the answer is, and now we find that we're back to Deuteronomy. And we read chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. Well, we might want to keep reading. Now we get to verse 4. And we start to get an explanation as why he said that you are not to show any favor to them. For they will turn your sons away from following me, and they will serve other gods. And then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. But this is what you shall do to them. You shall tear down their altars, smash their memorial stones, cut their Asherim to pieces, and burn their carved images in the fire. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his personal possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. Okay, so we start to see some of God's reasoning. Why do I want you to do this? This command that I've given you? Because they are going to turn your sons away from following me. They're not going to deceive you because you understand what's going on, but they're going to deceive your sons. Interesting. It's concerned about the next generation. Then we keep reading. Now we go back to Deuteronomy 20. He just said to not leave alive anything that breathes in this one. in verses 16 and 17. Why? So that they may not teach you to do according to all that are detestable things which they have done for their gods, so that you would sin against the Lord your God. That's why. That raises a question. What are all these detestable things? But then we keep reading and searching, and we find a clue. And you go to Genesis 15. And it's 2 verses here to split up, so there's a dot in the middle there. Know for certain your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. Okay? And then in the 4th generation, they will return here. And then an interesting wrap-up to this thought. For the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. What's going on? Here he is talking to, I believe, Abraham. Your descendants will be in a land that is not theirs, and they will be there for 400 years. The Israelites in Egypt. And then in the 4th generation, so they're going to be there 400 years, and then 4 generations, apparently later, they will return here, back to the promised land. For the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. So the Amorite are in the land at this point. 400 plus years earlier, they're already there. They have iniquity, but iniquity that is not yet complete. Interesting. The first thing that we get from this is if there's concern, well, God is just wiping these people, he's just, he should be merciful. Apparently, there's been a lot going on with the Amorites since before the Israelites' time in Egypt. And God is having mercy and has had mercy on them for over 400 years. I'd say probably we're in the 500-year range here after this. He's having mercy on them this whole time. And so he says their iniquity is not yet complete. Now we know now that we know the end of the story, where that leads, 400 plus, close to 500 years later, you've got the Israelites coming back and wiping out the Canaanites, the Amorites, all those nations. I think God's had mercy all this time, and they've had all this opportunity to do something about this iniquity. But some questions are being raised as, what are they talking about? He's talking about this detestable things and iniquity. And it raises questions. First, let's talk about just quick, what is iniquity? So just some ideas here. But a gross immorality, wickedness would be understood as a definition. It's generally in reference to sins which are done on purpose. It's not like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. It's accident. It's generally reference to something. It's purposeful. And the Hebrew word, I don't know how you pronounce it, but awan. But it means to bend or distort. So it's not referring to like a misunderstanding of what is right or wrong, but an intentional distortion of the truth, then lead into this wickedness and a gross immorality. And that's where you get the understanding the connotation this is on purpose. So there's a slight distinction between iniquity and the general concept of sin in Scripture. We see this numerous times. There's 3 passages there. I'll just quickly grab the single verses here. Exodus 34:7. Keeps loving kindness for thousands, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet he will by no means leave the guilty unpunished, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children. But in that context, we see 3 different words. There's iniquity, there's transgression, there's sin. Some would understand it that it's, okay, all iniquity and all transgression is sin, but not all sin is iniquity or transgression. And, this is debatable, but this is the idea. And so that's a start on it if it's something that's of interest. Jeremiah 31. just so you see where there's just different usage of these terms. Verse 34. They will not teach again, each man his neighbor and each man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their sin, forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. So that's probably a familiar one, but there's an example again of using the different concepts in the same context. But he's talking about iniquity. He's not saying, oh, they're sinful. We're like, well, because you could say everybody's sinful. And if we were doing a back and forth as a devil's advocate, I'd be like, well, what? These other people, they're sinful. You're sinful. Why doesn't God wipe you out? America's got lots of sin. He should wipe out America. See, your God is totally inconsistent, right? Well, okay, there's something else. There's this. It's talking about iniquity. It's not just everybody has sin thing. He's really emphasizing iniquity here. So there's some thoughts on why that might be significant, and I'm going to come back to it as well. Let's see. Oh, how do I go back? We'll stay there for now. All right. So this question about that I was talking about there, it's actually in these, where we have all their detestable things that they've done, and this iniquity has raised these questions. What is he talking about? And this takes us to a whole nother passage. And this takes us to Leviticus. What I would call the worst and least exciting to read passage in the entire Bible. And guess what we get to do? Read it. So, takes us to Leviticus chapter 18, basically the whole chapter. So this is not for entertainment purposes. So he starts out and he says in chapter 18 of Leviticus, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say that I am the Lord. You shall not do what is done in the land of Egypt, where you lived, nor are you to do what is done in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. This is how we know what he's referring to in this chapter. Because right at the beginning of it, he says, you're not to do these things that they've done in Egypt and in Canaan. You shall keep my statutes and my judgments by which a man may live if he does them. I am the Lord. In verse 6, he starts into this is a list of stuff. All right. None of you shall approach any blood relative of his to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, that is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother, you are not to uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife, it is your father's nakedness. The nakedness of your sister, either your father's daughter or your mother's daughter, whether born at home or born outside, their nakedness you shall not uncover. The nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, their nakedness you shall not uncover, for their nakedness is yours. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, born to your father, she is your sister, and you shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister, she is your father's blood relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is your mother's blood relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. You shall not approach his wife, she is your aunt. Just in case you were thinking, well, what about that? Not even that, right? You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and of her daughter. Nor shall you take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are blood relatives. It is lewdness. You shall not marry a woman in addition to her sister as a rival while she is alive to uncover her nakedness. I want them to compete over me. It's no. Now, what is all that? What is that? 12 verses basically on incest. Now, the question would be, who's confused about this? Nobody here. Nobody I know. And you say, why are you telling us this? Don't we all understand it? We all understand it. We're like, why would that even be interesting? We shouldn't have to be told any of this. The Israelites shouldn't have to be told any of this. And you think, why are you putting this all here? Because he said, what is done in the land of Egypt and was done in the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you, shall not walk in their statutes, and now he's going through it. This is what's going on. Because people are doing it. Now, just to get the whole chapter, there's one verse that a lot of people wonder about. Also, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness during her menstrual impurity. I don't think that means happened to have started her period today. Oh, we did something wrong. I think what I understand it is there's this intention of purposely trying to mate with blood as a ritual, and that was what he was talking about. And so that's not really that important here, but it's in the chapter, so I gave you a mention about it. That's a thought on it. Then he gets into the key things, the rest of the key things that will be on the list here. You shall not have, I'm in verse 20. You shall not have intercourse with your neighbor's wife to be defiled with her, otherwise known as adultery. You shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of the Lord your God. I am the Lord. You shall not lie with a male as one lies with the female. It is an abomination. Obviously, that's homosexuality. Also, you shall not have intercourse with any animal to be defiled with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate with it. It is perversion. That would be bestiality. It says, do not defile yourselves by any of these things, for by all these, okay, so don't miss this, by all these the nations which I am casting out before you have become defiled. Oh, we're getting some answers. Why is all this happening? Because by all these things have become defiled. For the land has become defiled. Therefore I have brought its punishment upon it. So the land has spewed out its inhabitants. But as for you, you are to keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not do any of these abominations, neither the native nor the alien who sojourns among you. So that the land will not spew you out. Verse 28, you shall not, and should you defile it, as it has spewed out the nation which has been before you. Whoever does any of these abominations, those persons who do so shall be cut off from among their people. All right. A lot going on there. Here's our list now. So, what is this iniquity that has overcome the Canaanites? And in Leviticus 18, we find a whole, is diatribe the right word? About incest, right? It's just going through all the possible ways someone could think of trying to, it's like, oh, is this one okay? He goes through all of it. Not that, not that, not that. Okay, so we have lots on that. Then adultery, we have child sacrifice, we have homosexuality, we have bestiality. Okay, a lot going on. Now, to understand what's behind all this, so the debauchery of the Canaanites, it was perpetuated by a fertility cult, a fertility religion, in which these practices are rooted in in the fertility cult and fertility religion is what these practices were rooted in. They were tied to an eroticism. They tied eroticism to this growth of crops, successful harvests, etc. So what has happened over the years is these Canaanite practices were systematic, such that the entire population was expected to participate. The culture has reached a point where there's no escaping these practices. So one of the things that's interesting here is you have these practices such as adultery and bestiality. They progress from being illegal to permissible to encouraged in general, with exceptions, to expected by the time of the Exodus. It reached this point where in the culture, this was expectation. So when it's at earlier stages, when it's it's obviously if it's illegal, or if it's just permissible, but it's not expected, or if it's encouraged but it's not required, there's choice, right? Each person has their ability to determine how are they going to, participate in this. Then you reach a point where it's the expectation of the society. And this is where we're at the time of the Exodus. We've found the evidence of this in Hittite writings, and they have talk about where, okay, with sex with animals, it was, so bestiality was illegal. Then it was, well, not with dogs or pigs, but it was okay with other animals. Just okay. Then it was, this is a good thing. So over time, and so they were able to basically get assessments of this in their writings to reach to where it's like, this is what you ought to do. And they have this progression, and it's going from the time with Abraham, and then with the Genesis passage that we looked at, we were saying that the iniquity is not yet complete, and now you go on through, you've got this iniquity of the Amorite coming to this completion, which I think is well over 500 years, actually, I think. But the couple thoughts on the other thoughts here. Clay Jones identifies what took place here with the children regarding the child sacrifice with Molech. So Molech was a Canaanite underworld deity represented by an upright, bull-headed idol with a human body in whose belly a fire was stoked and in whose outstretched arms a child was placed that would then be burned to death. And it was not just infants. Children as old as 4 were sacrificed. And they have found graves with hundreds, where they say it looks like there was like mass sacrifices in some of these locations. But this is what was going on. Here's what that looks like, by the way. If you that would be one depiction of Moloch. These are drawings, obviously. But what the idea is, so in his lap, they would have the fire stoked, or down at his feet, coming up through the legs, and then it would be now you place the child on the arms there, and you have the burnt sacrifice happen. So the archaeological evidence indicates that children were not only sacrificed, but occasionally, but that many thousands were the victims. So when we're thinking about God and God wiping them out after centuries of mercy and allowing this to continue to evolve, and it gets into deeper and deeper and deeper the circumstance, we wonder, what is God's purpose in what he's doing in this commanding the Israelites to wipe them out at this point? And I want to say God's purpose is to rid the earth of the detestable practices that coincided with these worship of gods like Molech and Baal. To eliminate the worship of demons then, which would then eliminate the terrible atrocities, these terrible atrocities from the earth. His point is not to eliminate the people. The point is to eliminate demon worship. Now here's why I'm going to call this demon worship. Because it was understood with what we know about Molech, that this is a demon. So you go back, you look at, here's this list of these things. We'll go back to that. And we say, okay, you've reached a point where this is if you're in the society, you're expected to be partaking in these things. Some children are going to get sacrificed. You're going to have homosexuality, which of course that wasn't like two people having a relationship. It'd be like children being raped. Bestiality, our children are going to be having sex with animals, and you say, okay, who comes up with this? Okay, so this is what I really want to try to think about. Who comes up with these ideas? That here's our religion, we're going to do these things. There's going to be incestuous relations, there's going to be all this stuff. Men sitting around saying, let's come up with things we'll do within our religion that will be acceptable practices of worship. Things they're going to come up with things happen. No, they're like, how about, if you go to the temple, you can have sex with prostitutes. That's a great idea. Yeah. Okay, we come up with that. There's a great one for our religion, because it's what? It's might seem pleasing, or it's appealing to our senses, right? Some pleasurable idea that we have. Whether it actually is going to work out, another question, but they think, oh, this sounds great. You're talking about humans making up a religion. What do they come up with? And we've seen what humans come up with and all these things, temple prostitution, and then you have these encounters at the temple. You say, okay, I understand why humans would make that up. Why would you make up a religion, religious practices, where your children or people within your family are engaging in incest? Why would you make that up? Why would you make up where you're sacrificing your children? Where other people are having sex with your kids, even in a homosexual way, and then bestiality for members of your family. You have to go do that because they have to, because it's expected. You say, who comes up with this? And what I'm suggesting to you is that's not humans. This is coming from a demonic source. And then as this gets introduced and it evolves, it goes through this process of going from, well, okay, these things are okay, but not those, to, well, that other one's, that's fine too. To, okay, well, these aren't, all this is not a big deal, that's fine. To, well, really you should. This is what you should be doing. And then this is the expectation. And if you're not doing it and something doesn't go right, then you're going to be the one at fault because you're not pleasing the gods. And now you have to. And now you get born into this society, and what do you get to do? Participate in all this. Because you're choosing to? No. Just because you happen to exist in that society, you get to participate. And we think, well, this is really horrible. You don't even have a choice at this point. It's evolved to where it's not something where people are making decisions and you can, like, where you can find it or you can, like, stay away from it. No, it's there and there's no escaping. So what I'm suggesting here is the destruction of the nations is merely a means to the end of wiping out the practices of demonic worship. For the sake of God's people and for the well-being of the future of humanity. And God is demonstrating his justice. He's actually revealing how good he is in the face of the atrocities of demon worship. He's revealing who he is. Because you think about this. If God was to do nothing about all these atrocities, children are being born, they're getting raped, they're being forced into, as they grow now, they come into puberty, maybe, hopefully, at least it was, we don't know when this is happening. Hopefully they're getting that far. Now you get to participate in bestiality. You're expected that you're engaging in some kind of incestuous relationships. Oh, you might have been sacrificed and never even got there, and that might be actually preferable. And think, what if God was to do nothing about all this and just let more and more and more kids get born into that? And another generation and another generation and another generation, and they just come in and they have no choice. They're just engulfed in this, and they don't even have the opportunity to know different. Don't even have the opportunity to think about what the heck is going on. It's all they know. And if God did nothing and was like, I'm indifferent about that, wouldn't we question God's goodness and ask, where was God? Why didn't God do something about that? Why did God just let this go on and on and on and on? Of course we would wonder that. We'd say, what has God done? Well, what we see in the scripture is he's done with it. He's like, this cannot go on. I will not allow any more kids to be born to this. It's reached the point where there's no escaping it, where this is the culture, you're born in it, and you're just consumed with it. You don't have choice. It's time to end it. And he's going to bring the Israelites in, and he's going to wipe it out. And he commands them, this is what you're to do. Why? Because the iniquity, as I said, the iniquity was not complete, it's now complete. Their iniquity is complete. And I think what that means is, when it says iniquity is complete, the completion of iniquity is the idea of that it's reached this point of where the self-destruction has occurred. It's consumed, and there's no escaping this anymore. And the self-destruction has taken place, and now it's time to end it. And God's the one who would know when that is. But if God didn't act and didn't put a stop to all these things that were happening to children, we'd wonder, how could God let it continue? How could God... Notice how the question would turn right around. How could a good God let all this go on? The answer is he can't. And he had mercy. And finally, it was time for justice. And had to put an end to it. So in purging the land of these evils of demon worship, God made a way for people to live in purity, to live in truth, so that ultimately redemption could come to us all. Thus, this act of wiping out the Canaanites is neither unjustified nor capricious. And so I said, well, what's going to have to be true for this to be okay, or to not be some atrocity on the part of God? Well, it's got to be, it can't be unjustified and it can't be capricious. Well, it's neither. It's not unjustified. We see the reason. It's not capricious. It has clear reasons and purposes to why he's doing this. And it's important to understand God's the one who has the authority and the knowledge to determine when this decision is necessary. We don't know when, but God knows when. And so therefore we have a God who is not vengeful. He's not showing vengeance. He's not showing some lack of mercy. He's had mercy. He's not some unmerciful being. He's been merciful. He's also just, and he's good because he's not going to let more and more generations be abused in this way and not even have the opportunity to live and to understand truth and understand what's good. He's not going to let that happen. So the last thing I want to just talk about is there's two ways of handling all this that I've been talking about. So I went ahead and called it genocide. You might have noticed that. Some are going to take a different approach, and they'll say that they don't think it's genocide per se, but more they want to call it capital punishment. So the reason is the same from everything that we've been talking about here from Leviticus 18. We say, but what it is, rather than it's commanding genocide, what God's commanding in this case is the Israelites to carry out capital punishment. That's a little softer, and I don't have an objection to taking that route. The reason I took the route I did and going ahead and calling it genocide, I'm saying what would be a reason that could justify a genocide would be if you're dealing with demon worship and you're wiping out demon worship, the only way to wipe out demon worship, because you can't wipe out demons, is you got to wipe out the worshipers. You got to end that. And that's why you would wipe out the children as well, because you have to wipe out all of them and not have, preserve a generation that then grows up and wants to go back to it. And it's like, no, you have to end it all. Now, I think you can go either way with this. I took it the harder way because it's a little softer to go, okay, wait. It's not a command of genocide. It's a command for them to carry out capital punishment. I'm just fine with either one of them. Either way. Some are adamant. I can go either way with it. But what I just try to demonstrate is I can answer it on the harder way to approach it. If we can answer that one, we can answer both either way. We're going to be just fine on this. So just so you're clear on what I'm saying, like we could say, okay, yes, this is a command of genocide, and try to solve that apparent problem there. Or we could, what some do is they're going to redefine that and say, no, it's not a command of genocide, it's a command for them to carry out capital punishment based on these things, on these same things that we've been talking about. And to the person, if you're going that way on the wording, what it's saying is that we don't, with the word genocide, it would be you would take that position if you're, that other route, if you're thinking the word genocide is something that is an absolute wrong, and if that's an absolute wrong, then this can't be genocide. So people that feel that way take the other route and say, no, this is a God commanded them to exercise capital punishment based on these crimes and what they've been doing. And I don't quibble with which way somebody wants to do it. I think either way is fine in how you approach that. I totally understand why some people will say, well, I don't want to deal with the word genocide there. I want to go with a different word, a different whole concept. And that's that's fine. And so I just want to be clear that there's different ways. I did it that way to show that we can do it either way. So that's that capital punishment would, by the way, be the same like in Jeremiah 29. The Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, all those guys are taken off to Babylon, and then God says, here's what's going to happen. Jeremiah sends a letter and says, here's what's going to happen to everybody who didn't go. And they're getting wiped out. And it'd be more taking that route with this. We're just saying it's just like what God did with them is those people that were left that Babylon left in Jerusalem, God wiped them out with the sword, with famine, all those things, and it was a capital punishment on those people, essentially. And so they just say this was the same thing as that. If you take the capital punishment route, you say it's the same kind of thing that God's doing, and he's bringing these consequences, and the consequence is death. So that's just you see connections. But so that's where I'm wrapping up with what I'm putting together. I'm happy to take any questions if something's come to mind. Yeah.
All right, yeah, we do have about 10 minutes, so we can do a few questions. I see a hand up already.
So thank you, Duane. You used the word genocide.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, on the groups that are listed there, the people groups, to me that's the elimination of an entire people group, genocide. How many of those were totally eliminated?
Well, so they didn't wipe out the Gibeonites. And then we see that as time goes on, the Israelites start getting these relationships and actually doing the intermarrying, and you see them actually start to worship and start going into some of these practices, and that's when Babylon comes. And then the ones who were really leading that whole engagement with those things are the ones that are left behind in Jerusalem by Babylon, which is what had just mentioned there, that God then wipes out. But though these things still happen because some would say it's simply because they didn't finish the job and they allowed the Gibeonites to live, which means that certainly it would have tempered things, but that would then grow again back towards where it had been within that nation. So others were eliminated. Some make the case, they say that the Israelites, as they came in, did allow some people to escape and to leave if they wanted to leave. So like if women wanted to leave, they would let them leave. And I think there's a good reason to think that they would have done that and allowed that to happen. So then it'd say, okay, so if they're going to they depart from where Israel is, they would let some of these people go. But we don't know exactly about what that looked like, but that's some of the ideas. Yeah, okay.
I had a question rolling around in my mind, and then toward the end you made a comment which may have spoken to this, but I'd like to ask the question anyway. On the one hand, it's an atrocity that these people were sacrificing their children to Molech, and so God comes in to take care of that, but his solution kills all the babies and young children. We normally don't think of them as being culpable.
Yeah. Sometimes that's the most troubling part of the whole thing. People are like, well, okay, I can see these adults made bad choices. Why the kids? Like these children, they didn't make the choice. If they were participating, it was forced on them. So, and then the animals can come up there. So I think the idea on the children is what I alluded to it, where you have people who then grow up and their family's been killed, and now they grow up in some other society, and then they wonder, what's my heritage? What did I grow up with? Or I knew maybe about some of these things. So I start to now go seek it out to understand it, and as I go do that, I'm like reviving this whole, demonic worship and these practices of that had been put to rest, at least for a time, And now I'm kind of seeking it out again because I just want to I want to know my heritage, and so I go in that direction. And I start reviving that. So you don't want these people who are now wanting to revive it and seek out their history and their family and all that, these kind of things. You also don't want, another problem I think that comes up is you don't want children that rise up and they want to turn on you if they're living within your nation. You wouldn't want, here's these people, we spare these kids, now they grow up, but they have this bitterness and they want to get vengeance against Israel for wiping out their families. And now you have this almost enemy within arising. And so there's would be some of the reasons for why I think he goes that way. The animals, of course, are wiped out. I mean, you just have to think of it, and it's like obvious, because if people have been having sex with the animals, you don't want them. Now, they're not doing it with all of them, but you don't know which ones. When you come in, so you don't know which ones are which, and that's why God's like, wipe them all out. He's not doing it he's not just capriciously, oh yeah, just wipe them out, that'll be fun. He's like, no, let's eliminate the animals, because there's this bestiality that's been going on. You don't know which animals have been participating in that. There's no way to figure it out, so you don't want them. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in the introduction, Chris said you were teaching apologetics at the University of Washington.
Yeah.
That is intriguing. Can you enlighten us a little more on that?
Yeah. So I've been doing a ministry where I work with students there at the university. It's a 6-quarter-long program I do in discipleship and defending the faith. And we work through a series of apologetics and the reasons for thinking Christianity is true, and then dealing with objections. This is one of them that we do. And so it's a ministry that I've started and I do there, working with students that are interested. They find out about it by usually word of mouth, and then we do small group ministry and dive into all the questions about our faith. And it's exciting to help them because they're the ones that are in the thick of it and facing the challenges of their faith, and they're the ones that have the opportunity for the conversations, because natural conversations. I could walk in there and like try to find somebody to talk to, and they may or may not want to talk. But they got people that they know that are raising up objections and that are they have an active relationship with which to talk to those people. And I just love having the opportunity to help them prepare to engage in those opportunities. And so so it's a small group ministry that I've focused on. Yeah. You can ask me more about it.
Mm-hmm.
For now.
Last call for question. Oh, one. You could have raised it sooner. Good grief.
Duane, why do you think it was important that the Israelites were actively involved in this rather than just God wiping these people out?
Yeah. I think that's an interesting question. So one of the questions I asked was, why is he wiping out some certain nations and not others? Right? Why this one and not why not other ones? Why isn't he wiping out later on the Greeks, who had all the temple prostitution and stuff? We didn't wipe them out. Okay. But I think the key thing is there's all these other nations that are not being wiped out all around the region. And there's a sense in which God wants the other nations to know who is conquering. And he wants them to see, as they observe, who the true God is. And he actually, I think it's an act of mercy and grace in the sense where he wants to use this to reveal to the others that are not in the land of Canaan, that, hey, I want to know who that God is. If he was just to wipe out the Canaanites all by himself and not have the Israelites do it, so where they could say, and they're saying, of course, they're supposed to be saying, God is fighting for us. It's God. It's our God. It's not just some power of our own. So others are observing that. But if they're observing it and they see, hey, their God is doing this, because they know which God it is. But if God just did it, right? Now you just have a debate. Which God did it? Whose God is the true God? Whose God is the all-powerful God? I don't know. It's probably this one over here, or mine, right, or whatever. And then you don't have this situation where you cannot escape the conclusion that the God of Israel has given the victory. And so he wants that to be clear and evident, I think. That'd be my first thought on it.
Awesome. Thanks, Duane. Really appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
Let me remind everyone that next week, Pastor Featon is going to be here teaching. The week after that, I think Maureen O'Kane will be here doing another presentation on math and what that brings to the intelligent design argument. Duane, would you close out in a word of prayer?
Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
All right. God, we thank you for just for your word and your truth, for your goodness, and how you are not indifferent to sin, to iniquity, and you care deeply, and you want us to know truth. We just thank you for the answers that are in your word, that we can seek out truth directly from you, God. We just praise you for that. Praise you for how you demonstrate how good you are. And thanks for just a chance to dive into this topic and into the scriptures. And I just pray that we are encouraged in seeing just how good you are. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.